Hello, welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. On today's edition, we focus on the fragile relationship between India and China. 8 months after the G20 Bali summit, an important development has come to light. India's External Affairs Ministry has confirmed that the Prime Minister and Chinese President Xi Jinping met and spoke about the need to stabilize bilateral relations at the Bali summit. The comment comes as a clarification after China's foreign ministry said that the two leaders had reached consensus on stabilizing ties during the Bali summit. China's comments came after a meeting of BRICS national security advisors, which was attended by NSA Ajit Doval. This is an important revelation because the External Affairs Ministry had earlier mentioned only exchange of courtesies between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, and there was no word on bilateral ties. NSA Ajit Doval also made sharp remarks in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, stating that the situation along LAC since 2020 had eroded strategic trust and the public and political basis of the relationship. All this taking place ahead of possible face-to-face meetings between Xi Jinping and PM Modi at BRICS and G20. Let me take this across to former diplomat KC Singh. Also with us is Zorawar Daulet Singh, strategic affairs expert and adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Zorawar, if I could begin with you, how do you see the relations between India and China right now? Yes, there is information about a meeting between the two leaders at the Bali summit where the Prime Minister and the two leaders spoke about the need for stabilizing relations. Now you also have an episode where China has issued, once again, stapled visas to sportspersons from Arunachal Pradesh. How do you see the messaging?
See, well, depends on... Okay, all right. Go ahead.
The backdrop, of course, is the June 2020 violent confrontation between the two militaries. It led to a major breakdown. Since then, particularly September of 2020, the Indians and the Chinese have been gradually, in a very, very sort of prolonged way, trying to sort of bring something back from the brink. I think what both sides agree on is that there should not be any further escalation. They want to limit the possibility of an armed confrontation, a repeat of the crisis. We have created several buffer zones now in the LAC. So as far as armed crisis is concerned, I think things have been calmed down. But normalcy is something which is at a political level. The Indian side believes, rightly so, that until there is stability on the frontiers and a predictable positioning of both the militaries, there cannot be a business as usual approach on the India-China relationship. The Chinese side wants to focus on the border, but it also wants some kind of a political stability at the highest level where economic engagement, broader ties continue to develop. So I think this kind of mismatch of what would be the principles or the terms of a rapprochement have not been bridged. I think at the same time, we are seeing both the Indians and the Chinese, especially since the Ukraine conflict and a broader geopolitical trend towards multipolarity. I think they see themselves also as having to adopt or certain responsibilities on what this new world order will entail. They are together in BRICS, they're together in many other multilateral forums, the G20 you mentioned. This is going to bring the Indians and the Chinese at the highest levels together to discuss issues which are beyond the bilateral. So I think what we're seeing is both sides are finding ways to tiptoe around their problems to see can they at least have conversations on those bigger issues. But as we see, the past continues to sort of rear its head and the bilateral differences keep pulling them back. I think the coming weeks will show to what extent they will stabilize their ties. But I think there is a clear intent on both sides to find some kind of stability.
All right. Ambassador KC Singh, how important is for us to have support of China ahead of the G20 summit? We've not been able to find any consensus on the communique so far, and this will be really important for Prime Minister Modi. How crucial will be China's support? And do you think they'll come around to supporting us?
Look, success of the G20 is one thing, but for the Prime Minister, it's also important to keep an eye on the elections, because there are hardly 6 months after that left to the Lok Sabha elections. And the opposition will attack the government and saying the Chinese haven't gone back on depth sank plains, they're still camping there, buffer zones are where we used to patrol, those have been absorbed into the buffer zones. So essentially, China's idea of stability is to accept what is their idea of the line of actual control, and that we don't patrol beyond it. And then also in that sense claims to really accept their presence in a much more forward position than they've ever had in the past after 1962. Now, it's essentially, when you look at India-China relations, there is the bilateral, there is the regional, and there is the global. They can see that we have this engagement with the Americans. We have an Indo-Pacific strategy. We are promising BrahMos to Vietnam as well as Philippines. We are enlarging a military engagement. And there is the Quad. So we may be in the SCO, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but we are also in the Quad. So we are not willing to just give up one for the other. Whereas for the Chinese, for them to accept stability is if India accepts their supremacy, not only in Asia, but in a bipolar arrangement where they matter and the Americans matter. Whereas India does not accept that. We accept a multipolar arrangement. I don't think the Chinese accept it. There is talk within China. There are blogs appearing that throw India out of SCO. They are the ones who are blocking it. So all this is really a dance which is going on while India does a subtle balancing between two blocks and takes care of its own interests. Now, of course, for the government, it will be very important if the Chinese go back to the 2020 status quo and accept that they are rolling back. It will be a big win for the government before the next election, something like Balakot. I don't think the Chinese will be that willing to hand out something to India at this stage. But they would like, yes, as Mr. Daulet Singh said, that essentially they would like commerce, trade, etc. to be normalized. That is their idea of it. Now remember that the Sri Lankan president has been here. The Nepalese prime minister came to India before he went to Beijing, and the Chinese were unhappy about it. And we have a leg up in Bangladesh. So in an immediate South Asian region, other than Pakistan, the Chinese are putting pressure on Bhutan, offering them to settle the border issues separately. So this jostling will go on. It's not an easy thing. But I'm surprised. I think the External Affairs Ministry should have briefed properly after Bali, because when you have another country involved, sooner or later the facts come out. And then you're embarrassed. And there's no point. There would have been a subtle way of conveying that it was more than just shaking of hands.
Okay. Ambassador KC Singh, I'll come back to you. Zorawar, getting you back in. NSA Doval stating that situation along the LAC since 2020 has eroded strategic trust and the public and political basis of the relationship. How strong do you think are these comments and the message to China?
No, so this is a part of a long, as I said, a process to try and find what will be this terms of re-engagement. Can India convince the Chinese to restore the status quo ante on the LAC? The Chinese, on the other hand, are trying to say that let's move on without fully doing that. So there's going to be a bit of back and forth. But I think you also have to be conscious, and I think it's been raised, and the India-China relationship, both on that side and particularly on our side, is part of a nationalism. There's a national sentiment. So I think
all right. We seem to be losing that link with Zorawar, and I'll come back to him in just a bit. But Ambassador KC Singh, do you think both sides are trying to lay the groundwork for a possible meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping at BRICS and at the G20?
Well, certainly at the G20, if President Xi Jinping comes here, a meeting would be unavoidable. If you meet in a third country, you can always say, no, we just had a chit-chat, we just shook hands. But when leaders are coming here, it'll be very difficult to avoid a meeting. But when there is a meeting, the opposition will ask, what did you get out of it? You can't get away like after the Bali encounter and say, no, we didn't have anything to say to each other. And time is running out because you have the elections coming up. And really, this is the last opportunity to do anything if you want. And then, of course, winter comes in. So in the neighborhood, I don't see the Chinese handing out a win to India. And less than a win, what is it where India starts lifting the restrictions on Chinese and the Chinese don't move? Because we have invested in the Quad, We invested in a number of ASEAN countries who are beginning to work with us, because the Chinese have a problem almost with every neighbor in the southeast as well as in the south. So India has to keep. It's the Chinese who have to think that it is not in their interest to drive India deeper into an engagement with the Americans or with the West or with the East Asian. But I don't think they've reached that stage. That is not the way Xi Jinping operates, because they feel that this is, and that is why the visa issue. Why would they raise the staple visas at this point? The signal is we are not going to compromise on what are our claims. Stability means you take it as it is. We'll do a little adjustment here and there, and then we stabilize the LAC, maybe eventually a skeleton of what would be a final settlement on Chinese terms, and they'll keep it dangling on your head while they ask you to open up the market and ensure that you don't join blocks or join countries which inconvenience them or which curtail them in their larger agenda in annexing Taiwan, in grabbing more of the South China Sea. So it's a very complicated issue.
All right. We've run out of time. We're heading to a short break, but we'd like to thank Zorawar Daulet Singh and Ambassador K.C. Singh for joining us here on the program. On the other side, G20 Environment and Climate Sustainability Ministers meeting was held in Chennai. The meeting is a reaffirmation of G20 leaders' commitment to tackle climate change. A discussion with EU Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius when we are back. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. G20 Environment and Climate Sustainability Ministers meeting was held in Chennai. The meeting is a reaffirmation of G20 leaders' commitment to tackle climate change. European Commissioner for Environment Virginijus Sinkevičius, who is in India for that meeting, spoke to me earlier on carbon border tax, climate crisis, and the environmental impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. I began by asking him about his key priorities and main expectation from India.
First of all, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having me. It's my first visit to India, even so that, we've been working very closely with respective ministers on international fora for the past 4 years since I'm commissioner. I think what's extremely important, we've managed to reach a historic, very ambitious agreement. Starting with, Paris Agreement, going into ambitious agreement that was just in December reached in Montreal, COP15 on Global Biodiversity Framework, the protection of the high seas, so-called BBNJ Agreement. We are advancing very well on Global Plastics Agreement. It's great moments. It's moments to celebrate, but the next day when we wake up, we still need to go to work and deliver what we have agreed. So I think it's time, and my expectation is that we truly focus on implementation. On implementation, which is not going to be a walk in the park, which is not going to be a easy one, but implementation which can bring us even closer together in understanding the differences, in understanding the different positions, in deepening the cooperation, in strengthening the cooperation in areas like clean tech, batteries, hydrogen, so basically energy and transport transitions, our research and innovation, and so on. So I think this implementation should not be seen as some sort of burden, because EU also has quite a number of emissions that we need to deal with, and we have very ambitious 2030 target and even more ambitious one by 2050. But we must see it as an opportunity that can deliver new resilient jobs on the both sides, that can put us at the global leadership position with regards to the future technologies and not focusing on the dirty past.
Right. I'd like to ask you about the environmental impact of the Ukraine-Russia war. What is your assessment? Russia has pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative as well, which will have a big impact on food inflation. But coming specifically to the environment, what is your assessment?
So, starting with Russia pulling out of, grain agreement is another proof that Russia has been terrorizing the world in all possible means to achieve their imperial ambitions. And, the pulling out of the grain deal, first of all, is going to impact most vulnerable countries. Our partners outside the EU, that is going to be at the verge of basically hunger. And this is absolutely unacceptable. I truly hope that they will change their mind. International community is working hard to bring them back into the agreement. Secondly, when we look at the war, which is happening for more than 500 days since Russia cowardly attacked Ukraine and keeps on destroying Ukrainian cities, people's lives, and well-being all across Ukraine. Every night there is, rockets and drones launched at Ukrainian cities. They also deliberately target water treatment facilities, chemical storages. You know that the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe is now under Russian military control, and we're talking about the object, nuclear power plant, where not only, people from outside should not be allowed on this kind of object. Now people working there, they're basically working with the gun pointed at their head. And the latest event of when Kakhovka Dam was bombed by Russian military is another proof, where basically the whole area is deprived of any possibility for at least 8 years to have any of the agricultural activities. The water, of course, has sank everything, and to clean up, it will take years and years. If you look at the mining of Ukrainian fields, Ukraine now is the most mined country in the world. So demining it also is going to be a generational task. So this was a tragic war, which already took many innocent human lives. War that was started by Russia only, attacking Ukraine, and I know that there is always this discussion about the peace and etc. If Ukraine stops to defend, it disappears as a country. And the multilateral order that we've been fighting, this rules-based order, disappears as well. Because that would basically mean bigger country can come and just take, with any made-up reason, part of the foreign country territory without basically respecting any of the international agreements, lying into the faces of international community, and not caring about anything else. And environmental damages that are being piled up every day, they're going to have a long-term consequences, because we know that environmental damage respects no borders. So all of this pollution at the end of the day will definitely end up at the Black Sea. Most of this pollution will stay within the Ukrainian ecosystems for many, many years. And if you look, Ukraine has been the top country in agriculture for many, many years, feeding the rest of the world. So I don't really think so that these ecosystems will be able to deliver after it's been basically, burned out, mined and destroyed.
So you're saying it would take at least 8 to 10 years to overturn this damage that has taken place to the ecosystem, to the environment, because of the war?
It's only Kakhovka Dam. It's only Kakhovka Dam. But for example, if you look at, I visited some of the territories that the Russians, while moving back, they mined. So entire forests and etc. Demining activities are extremely expensive. It requires a lot of work. I don't think so that can be done so quickly as 8-10 years. So it depends. And some of the pollution, it will stay even longer, because, as we said, many chemical storages, water treatment facilities, they were bombed, and basically, people were left without a water sanitation. People were left with the exceedances of pollution, and that's also something that is not going to be a quick fix.
My final questions to you: the carbon border tax adjustment mechanism that the EU is coming up with, India has concerns around that, how this would probably slow down exports from India. This will make some companies non-competitive. How are you addressing some of the concerns that the Indian government has raised?
So, first of all, we've been working with our partners all along the way drafting the legislation. Secondly, we've given a long period of adjustment to the legislation. So 3 years before it fully kicks in. I think this gives enough time for our partners to prepare. We're ready to extend our hand and work together with the partners in order to clarify the legislation, in order to ensure that it's clear and can be fully implemented and don't have a disruption on the supply chains. However, I think it's also very important to explain the rationale behind it, because at the end of the day, if we all committed to climate neutrality, we cannot allow for emissions to move from the EU to other parts of the world. Because at the end of the day, when we are facing climate change, when we are facing biodiversity loss, when we are facing pollution, we're talking about the global crisis, about the triple planetary crisis. So if emissions, if even EU does extremely successful work, maybe joined by a couple other bigger economies around the world, and we manage to decarbonize, but the emissions moves to other parts of the world, at the end of the day, this planet is still bust. And we all are in the same boat. So I think we need to look for the measures that would ensure that we all can successfully fight CO2 emissions. And in the EU, the carbon pricing was extremely effective mechanism, ensuring that polluter pays principle is applied. It gives a tax fairness. It can help you to actually decrease the social taxes and putting the taxes on those who are the biggest polluters.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.